Welcome to the Business Talk, a global podcast series that highlights distinguished faculty members and their impactful scholarly contributions. I'm Deepak, your host from India. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Patrick Barwise, Emeritus Professor of Management and Marketing at London Business School, as our distinctive guest for today's podcast episode. Before we get started, I would like to introduce today's guest. Professor Patrick Barwise is a leading authority on marketing and media, renowned for his work on consumer-focused strategy, marketing leadership, brand management, consumer and audience behavior, and broadcasting policy. With a distinguished career spanning business, academia, and public service, he brings deep expertise as an international expert witnessed in complex commercial, competition, and tax cases. Beyond his academic work, he contributes to the entrepreneurial ecosystem as an advisory board member and early stage investor in several digital startups. Professor Barwise currently chairs the Archive of Market and Social Research and previously served as the chairman of Which, the UK's leading consumer organization. He began his tenure at London Business School in 1976, following an early career at IBM, and has since held visiting appointments in media research at Oxford University and the London School of Economics. In today's episode, Professor Patrick Barwise joins us to unpack the central ideas from his acclaimed book, co-authored with Professor Shin Mihan, Simply Better, Winning and Keeping Customers by Delivering What Matters Most. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Patrick Barwise to the conversation. Professor Patrick, it's a privilege to welcome you to Business Talk. We are grateful to you for accepting our invitation.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Professor, the Financial Times review of Simply Better started with a sentence. This is a book about marketing for people who have read too many books about marketing. Why do you think they said that?
Well, this was a brilliant FT journalist called Gary Silverman. And I think it refers to the fact that when people are first trained in marketing, they're taught two different things. One of them is that the job of marketing is to help the business deliver the customer's needs better than the competition. And that's absolutely valid. But they're also taught that the job of marketing is to differentiate their brand from the competition. And I think until we wrote the book, nobody had really pointed out that those are not the same thing at all. And they can even be in tension. And I guess one way of summarizing the book is to say, if you have to choose between meeting customer needs, especially delivering what matters most to the customers, which is the big question, and being differentiated from the competition, you should always prioritize the first over the second. The customers don't care about whether you're different from the competition. What they care about is, are you meeting their important needs? And if you do that better and better and better, then you will build a differentiated brand.
Professor, what prompted you to challenge the obsession with differentiation and argue that most customers mainly want the basics done well?
I think this comes out of really my early research. I think some of your listeners will be familiar with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute in South Australia, which is led by Byron Sharp. And Andrew Ehrenberg was my mentor at London Business School. He was my PhD supervisor. And his main research was about consumer behavior. And so I think that the thing which prompted it is the idea that we put this actually in the preface of the book. So books for managers, you have to put the key punchlines very early on because managers are too busy to read the whole book usually. And so in the preface, we have this statement: customers rarely buy a product or service because it offers something unique. Usually, they buy the brand that they expect to meet their basic needs from the category, gasoline or strategy consulting or mortgages, a bit better or more conveniently than the competition. What customers want is simply better, not more differentiated products and services. And I think that the roots of that are, the evidence for that is in the consumer research which we show in the book. And I'd emphasize the subtitle of the book, which is Winning and Keeping Customers by Delivering What Matters Most to Those Customers. And so I think that was why Gary wrote that in the FT, is that statement is rather a shock to many marketers, because there's been a tendency to be a bit obsessed about, unique features and benefits. And it's very nice to have a unique selling proposition. In reality, especially in service businesses, most unique features are either pretty trivial, then they don't deliver what matters to the customer, or if they are significant, they're probably not sustainable because the competition can copy them. And that's especially true in service businesses, where it's pretty much impossible in the airline business or the telecoms network business or any service business to deliver a benefit which can't, if it turns out to be of interest to customers, can't then be copied.
Professor, you and Dr. Singh Nihan emphasize generic category benefits like quality, reliability, and fair value over unique features and benefits. How do you explain this idea to a leadership team that's heavily invested in unique selling propositions and brand image?
Well, I think it's difficult because telling people they're doing the wrong thing is always difficult. And I'm sort of an academic. I'm not. I'm not diplomatic enough to be a great consultant and sort of work my way around this. But I think that the key thing is to show the customer evidence, and you can focus on what is it that what are the key drivers of customer dissatisfaction. So obviously, companies are interested in what are the drivers of customer satisfaction. They are not sufficiently curious about what are the drivers of customer dissatisfaction. And I think the other thing is you can look at evidence from things like brand valuation or customer ratings. It's remarkable that if you look at data from a company like Which or Consumer Reports in the US, there are businesses like telecom networks. Okay, now telecom network is, you would have thought it's not that easy to differentiate and build a differentiated brand. But if you then look at the ratings in things like Consumer Reports, they actually vary a lot. And so the fact that they vary a lot shows that the basics aren't just table stakes. Okay, so the tempting thing is to say that in a new market, of course, there's product differentiation, but once the market's settled down, everyone delivers the basics, and therefore you need USPs. But actually, the evidence from the consumer research is that that's not true. And so I think that in order to confront business leadership with the need to worry more about the basics, it's the consumer research that's your strong weapon.
Professor, in Simply Better, you argue that customers primarily care about whether a product does what it promises consistently and fairly. How should this insight reshape the way companies design their strategies and allocate their marketing budgets?
Well, that's a very good question, because you end up by focusing on the marketing budget. And so we make a very big distinction in the book between the basic offer, which is the product or service, and also the way that it's made available to people, and then the marketing communications. And I think when we use the word marketing, we actually use it in two quite different senses. There's what I'd call narrow marketing, which is how do you spend the marketing budget? And there's what I'd call broad marketing, which is what Peter Drucker was talking about, the marketing concept. So when it comes to the marketing budget, then the marketing budget goes on communications, it might go on packaging, promotions, research as well. And there's a sort of twist, which is that when it comes to marketing communications and packaging, you do need to be differentiated. If your advertising simply looks like everyone else's, then it won't cut through and it won't be effective. And if your packaging doesn't stand out on the shelf, then it's not going to cut through. And if we look back at the origin of the concept of the unique selling proposition, that came from two people. I mean, it came from basically the advertising community, people like Rees and Trout. And from the viewpoint of an advertising agency, of course, it would be wonderful if your product had a feature which really was of value to customers and was unique and wasn't imitated the following week by the competition. But that very, very rarely happens. Obviously, if you had that situation, then the advertising agency doesn't need to be creative. It just needs to keep talking about the unique selling proposition. But that's an extremely unusual situation. The more usual situation is that it's very hard work to deliver the generic customer benefits better than the competition, especially in a service business again, because you're very often relying on people who have, difficult marriages and all of those things. And it's pretty relentless. But broad marketing, which is, actually in my latest marketing book, the one on marketing leadership with Thomas Barter, we I think came up with rather a novel way of illustrating the marketing concept, which is, if you can imagine the simplest kind of Venn diagram, that's just two circles which overlap, and one circle is called customer needs, but the other circle is called company needs. And the overlap, which is where you are meeting both the customer's needs and the company's needs, that is where value is created. And a lot of the job of marketing is to help the company maximize that overlap. And that's sort of broad marketing. And that's mainly what we're talking about in this book. But we have one chapter on marketing communications. And in that, we say, look, everything you believed before about marketing communications is perfectly valid. So you do need to differentiate that. What you shouldn't then do is confuse that with the idea that customers are really buying your brand because of a unique feature or benefit. And I think both with marketers and also particularly with tech people, there is a tendency to see the unique features as much more important to customers than they really are to customers. So you need to measure that. And also to overcomplicate life for customers. So our job in business is very often to try and simplify our customers' lives. And you don't do that by overcomplicating the experience they have of buying and using the product or service.
Professor, the book highlights companies like Toyota, P&G, Hilti, Tesco, and Ryanair as examples of firms that win by reliably delivering the basics better than their competitors. What are the one or two specific practices these companies use that most organizations still underestimate?
Well, I think Toyota is a nice example because it's the most valuable car brand on the planet. Now, Mercedes is a valuable car brand and so on. So there are some luxury brands which come close, and brand valuations are not. One shouldn't believe the third decimal point in a brand valuation because these are inherently rather subjective. Nevertheless, we have this enormously valuable brand. And the value of the Toyota brand was illustrated some years ago when General Motors actually set up a joint venture in California manufacturing one type of car. And it was then branded either as a Toyota or as a Chevrolet. And the Toyota sold at a slightly higher price than the Chevrolet, but it also sold 4 times as many units. And the distribution networks were different, but apart from that, the only difference was the brand. And so we say, well, Chevrolet is, an American icon, drove the Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry and all of that. And not so long ago, there were Americans who wouldn't buy Japanese products. There's a Mad Men episode in which a guy refuses to work on a Japanese account. But when it comes to ordinary American drivers, then clearly they value that Toyota brand. And the reason for that can only be, it's extremely implausible, but Toyota's advertising has been so brilliant that it's managed to con people to that extent into valuing this Japanese car more than an American icon like Chevy. So it can only be that for a large proportion of drivers who are not necessarily people who buy car magazines and what we call petrol heads, okay, that who basically see the car as primarily a functional thing. You want it to be reliable, you want it to be reasonable value for money, not to be a gas guzzler, okay, and get you from A to B, be easy to drive, and so on. And that includes particularly older consumers, it includes most women, and so on. And I think there's so that is how Toyota has built this enormous brand. And actually, if you look around the world, if you look at sort of terrorists around the world, then the 2 brands they really use are the AK-47, which is really the only valuable Russian brand, and they drive Toyota pickups because they know they're going to be reliable in the desert and so on. And so that's how they did it. Now, most of us can hardly remember any Toyota advertising. So I think that, that's sort of, in that case, the practice is just this relentless incremental improvement on reliability and ease of use and value for money and so on. I think there's another practice. You mentioned Toyota, you also mentioned Procter and Gamble. And there was a big sort of leap forward just after the millennium when Procter appointed a new CEO called A.G. Lafley. And A.G. Lafley did a number of very, very good things, one of which was to reduce the brand portfolio and say, we, Procter, we're a global company, we're only going to be interested in brands which have the potential to do $1 billion worldwide revenue. But another thing he did is to say, of course, we should carry on, commissioning market research. And Procter is one of the sort of marketing universities worldwide and is very good at commissioning and using market research and now data analytics. And this was a bit before the data analytics took off. But I want you, including quite senior people, I want you to spend time with consumers and quality time, like an anthropologist. Okay, I mean, an anthropologist, one of the main weapons of the anthropologist is the suitcase. They stick around for a long time. And if you stick around for a long time, you then discover, what really matters. And that, I think, is a way of understanding how the products fit into people's real lives and discovering what really does matter. Now, in one of the books we have Tide as an example, and Tide is an enormously valuable brand in the US, and it was really the first big synthetic detergent. But by the time you get to the millennium, the number of American women who really get emotional value, from their kids having a whiter shirt than the neighbor's kid, is sort of very small. And they do the laundry because they love their families, but they don't actually get direct satisfaction from it. So the brand team from the agency and the brand itself They went and they spent 4 weeks away from the big cities, spending quality time with women, talking to them about what's in their wardrobe, talking to them about what does matter, sitting with them when they had coffee with their friends and so on. And that is, if you think about that in the US, then that is sort of bridging what I'd call the empathy gap and the understanding gap between fairly senior people at Procter Gamble in Cincinnati and ordinary American housewives. And if you think that's quite a wide gap, then think about the senior Procter manager in Mexico and the average Mexican housewife. And so, as well as you've seen, I've put a lot of emphasis on data and metrics, but also there's another sort of dimension. And I think this applies both B2B and B2C. With B2B, it's not so difficult because the customers in B2B are more similar to yourself. But spend quality time with them. And if you're a service business, spend quality time in the front line. Okay, so they're turning up like a monarch and going away after an hour, you will learn nothing. Okay, sitting down and serving customers, then you'll start discovering, okay, what are the real issues? So I think that those are sort of two complementary approaches. There is the operational side, like Toyota, which is just relentless improvement. But there's also the bridging that empathy gap. And I think it's particularly important in B2B, especially, if you can spend some time with the most innovative customers. So in any value chain, if you look at the next stage of the value chain, then there will be 10% who are more innovative than the other 90%. If you can spend some time with them and ask them about, so what are your plans the next 3 years, the next 5 years, then you'll be able to do this more difficult thing, which is uncovering where the market is heading. What are the currently unmet needs? And I think that's very powerful, but it comes from sort of high quality, patient, direct contact with customers to complement the metrics. I think there's a third dimension, which is to do with the internal metrics. And so I'm, for instance, I'm quite a fan of Net Promoter Score. That Net Promoter Score was overhyped because it came from a consultancy and they pretended it was a better predictor of changes in market share than other, and it's not. But because it puts so much emphasis on dissatisfaction, I think that if you've got Net Promoter Score from the different parts of the business, then it doesn't tell you, it has no diagnostic value in telling you what the problem is. It can tell you where the problem is. And so if in a big business, if there's a division where the NPS is lower than you'd like it to be, then that's where you focus your attention. And then you have to do your root cause analysis and all of those things, because then you've got something practical to work on. And finally, on the sort of internal side, I'm a great believer in 360-degree data, particularly. There are various versions of this question, but if you look at 360-degree data and you look at what subordinates say in answer to the question, is your boss good at listening to things they don't want to hear and challenges? And that's enormously powerful in diagnostic terms, because in every business, everybody lies a little bit to their boss and spins and plays down bad news and plays up good news. And the boss invariably underestimates the extent of that, although the boss is doing exactly the same to his or her own boss. And so, again, I think there are very powerful organizational metrics you can use, which tell you that the negative messages from customers are not reaching the top.
Professor, you talk about understanding what customer really want from the entire product category, not just from a single brand. For example, what most people want from a car. How can managers uncover these category level needs rather than getting lost in brand level features?
Well, I think that that's really a continuation of what I've been talking about. So it's more difficult. Okay, so if you look at customer dissatisfaction, if you look at lapsed customers, you look at unhappy customers from your metrics, then that will tend to tell you how is the brand underperforming. You can also look about what they like about the competitors. Okay, so and that is relatively straightforward. What's much more difficult is to uncover the needs, which because all of the competitors are delivering up to a certain level, but not above that level. Then I think that probably you need qualitative research more than quantitative research. And again, you need to be patient about it. And I think one approach is to ask people, well, what is it, simply the naive question, what is it that, really annoys you about retail banking? Okay, or about, car services, looking after your car, or rental companies, or any type of business. What are the three things? Let's not talk brands. Let's just talk about whichever type of car you drive, whichever bank you use. What are the things that most annoy you? And then you begin to uncover those things. Now, they may be too expensive to sort out, but at least you're starting to build an agenda. And I think that qualitative research is probably the best way to get into that. There's a second, sort of less reliable way, but more powerful if you can succeed, and that is to get people to think about something which is sort of radically different. And a difficulty in market research is that people are not, the responses of people to something which is a long way from their current experience, those responses are not that reliable. And I think that the most powerful examples of radical innovation very often are to do with dramatically cheaper, especially services. And so low-cost airlines, the low-cost airline concept is very different. Okay, so when I was younger, then flying was a relatively luxurious thing for the majority of people, and they tried to pretend that you're likely to sit next to James Bond and treat it as if it's very premium. And then once you start having people like Southwest Airlines and the other low-cost carriers, they say, no, what we're going to do is our starting point is we want to take cost out, and we don't want to take 5% of cost out. We want to take 50% of cost out. And therefore, how would we design the end-to-end operation in such a way that it's dramatically cheaper? And you then can test that idea. And again, you will need to give people time to sort of think their way around it, because they're very unfamiliar to it, if it really is sort of radically novel. And there's no way around this, that radical innovation is extremely risky. Okay? And you can't remove the risk from radical innovation. But most pioneers end up on their faces with arrows in their back. And the people who succeed in new categories, are very often a fast follower who learns from the mistakes of the pioneer and then gets it right to deliver reliably. And so Procter in disposable diapers, for instance, actually IBM, I started life at IBM. IBM was not the pioneer in computing, but when I was at IBM, the expression was, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. and that's because we over-delivered on service. I mean, and company I've written about, Infosys, would be a little bit, under promise, over deliver. And so I think that you don't have to be the pioneer, and actually the odds are somewhat stacked against the pioneer, because pioneering successfully is so difficult and so risky. But you should be very alert for who are the people who are sort of pioneering things which look as if they have high potential. And, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you buy them. So that is obviously one option. And for entrepreneurs, that's quite often the best exit option, is we're going to build the business up and then sell it to a large corporate. And that's quite an efficient way in which capitalism improves, is small people, many of whom then go bust, but some of whom succeed and then get bought up or possibly scaled up. In the case of, say, diapers, disposable diapers, Procter didn't make an acquisition, but they saw what was happening, and then they deployed their very, very strong operational skills and then their very strong marketing skills, and became the market leader. And then decades later, they're still the market leader.
Professor, one of the big ideas in the book is that performance on the basics can vary enough between competitors to dominate all other sources of competitive advantage. Why do you think so many firms still treat these basics as a mere table stakes instead of a major strategic opportunity?
I think there are two two answers. One is that the basics are really, really boring, and and also they depend on operations. And marketers, for understandable reasons, have a sort of self-perception as, we are creative people, we do sort of exciting things. Again, it comes back to patience. It's really important to spend time with your operations colleagues, talking to them about their own problems and what they think might be opportunities. Of course, if you're in an R&D context, talk to the R&D people as well, because then start, trying to test out, maybe on a pilot scale, some of the things which could either take significant cost out. And if you can take significant cost out and it doesn't make a difference to customers, then do that. And that very often involves simplification. So the low-cost airlines, it's a combination of drastic simplification and then ensuring through things like dynamic pricing that you have a high load factor, that all the seats are full, and then you make sure that the planes fly more because you turn them around faster and so on. And those are, marketers may not naturally see that as sort of their domain. So you need to sort of think beyond the narrow marketing box. So the narrow marketing is also important. And there are some categories in which narrow marketing, the actual branding, is the main driver of brand value. So, I mean, a category like vodka. All right, now vodka consists of ethyl alcohol, which is a C2H5OH, it's a generic molecule, water, which is a generic molecule, trade marketing, which isn't completely generic, but all the companies sort of can do it. And it's, you can differentiate, but only up to a point. And then the magic bit is brand. And so you think of something like Grey Goose vodka, which was created out of thin air by a very clever French Canadian. And then he sold the company for, I don't know what, 1.5 billion or something 5 years later. And that was purely driven by branding. That's extremely unusual. Beverages happen to be the extreme case because under blind taste conditions, most consumers can't tell, Coke from Pepsi under normal drinking conditions if they can't see the brand as well. But for all service businesses, I would say all business-to-business businesses, consumer durables, and a lot of frequently purchased consumer products, the main driver of brand value is the product or service, and that involves working very hard with colleagues. When Thomas and I looked at the data on what drives the book, this is for the book on what drives the success of marketing leaders, both their impact on the business and their personal career success. What we found was that as the thing that all the leadership books are about, which is building the team below you and motivating it and so on, of course, is important. But more important in combination was working on what matters to your boss and your boss's boss, and if you like, meeting the company's needs and the board's priorities, but especially the relationships you build with your peers, especially your non-marketing peers, finance, operations, especially maybe sales as well. And so I think a lot of this is about marketers getting out of their offices, walking the halls, and learning and really actively listening to their non-marketing colleagues, and then working creatively with them. And I think the other sort of reason why, apart from the fact that it's sort of unfamiliar and the basics are rather dull, what matters to customers, especially when you don't deliver, is rather dull. But I think the other reason is people don't look enough at the customer data. Okay, that especially the data on dissatisfaction.
Professor, you draw a distinction between in-the-box thinking for the product and distribution and out-of-the-box thinking for advertising and communication. Can you unpick that paradox and share an example of a company that gets this balance right?
Yes, I mean, I think that the distinction is sort of what it says on the tin, that a reason for much of the confusion and the sort of overhyping of unique features and benefits is that when it comes to marketing communications, broadly defined, then you do need to be distinct in order to cut through. But what one shouldn't then do is delude oneself that that the main reason that customers choose brand A rather than brand B is because of the advertising or a unique feature or something like that. As I say, in the case of, there are a small number, especially of things like beverages, in which the brand communications really are important, but that's very, very unusual. An example, one we have in the book, is the telecoms company called Orange in the UK, which it got the highest customer satisfaction because it put in a more reliable network, and at a time when that was something in the relatively early days of second generation mobile networks. And so it did all of that, but it also had extremely distinctive advertising. So at that time, the advertising, rather like a lot of the early tech advertising and things like personal computers, the advertising was all talking about kilobytes and different price packages and so on. And it was, I mean, deadly dull, and also all looked rather similar. And the brand names all sounded a little bit, they all sounded as if they were to do with telecoms. And it's interesting that, orange obviously is the name of a color, but especially the name of a fruit, which is something friendly. Among the most valuable brands on the planet is another fruit called apple. And so these are sort of friendly things which don't sound techy, but they also did some advertising which large numbers of people absolutely hated, which was extremely distinctive. And the message was, the future's bright, the future's orange. And it was a very sort of sci-fi type of advertising, very distinctive. And I have to say that if nobody hates our advertising, it's not going to be great advertising. It may be competent, but great advertising is almost invariably hated by some people because it's unfamiliar. And so I think Orange in the early days sort of got the sweet spot where they were perceived as better value for money than the competition, despite selling at a slight premium price. And also they really cut through and they were talked about a lot with this, the future's bright, the future's orange. And if you talk to Brits, today, whatever, 30 years later, 25 years later, any Brit aged more than, about 35 or 40, will know that slogan. And so you can do both. Procter, with Tide, after they changed the advertising to be more emotionally compelling, I think I would argue that IBM, IBM, it wasn't sort of the advertising, but the products were not sort of cutting edge, or they weren't bleeding edge. But there was this impression no one got fired for buying IBM. And at that time, and in computing terms, I worked for IBM in the late Stone Age. Okay, we're talking a long time ago. And there were people called data processing managers. We looked after the data processing managers and with very high service. I spent far more time. I was in the team selling to Barclays Bank. I spent most of my time on their premises, not in our own office. And but we also, the products were nicely designed. Apple products, okay. As it happens, the chief designer, Sir Jonathan Ive, is a Brit, and there's a very, very strong aesthetic dimension to Apple. But the main thing is that now Apple has built up a sort of ecosystem of products that talk to each other. But the expectation has always been that when I get an Apple product out of the box and plug it in, it's going to work, and I'm going to know how to use it. The expectation with Microsoft, maybe not so much.
Professor Simply Better outlines an actionable framework for understanding what customers value, discovering unmet needs, and channelizing dissatisfaction into improvement. If a CEO asks you for the first 3 concrete steps to apply this framework on Monday morning, what would you suggest?
Well, I guess I'd probably, first of all, say look at the data on customer dissatisfaction, find out more about unhappy customers from the Net Promoter Score, what's driving that unhappiness, and so on. Secondly, I might look at the 360-degree data to see where in the business might negative messages be being hidden and not being passed up. Okay, in a large company especially, every layer has a tendency to filter out bad news. And the third thing I do is spend some time with customers, quality time with customers, either serving them at the front line, but stay for a day, not an hour, or in B2B, going to them and talking to them about their, what are we doing that's good? What are we doing that's not so good? Who's doing something better than us? Where do you plan to be in 3 or 5 years' time? How can we help you do that and work together, and so on? So I think a lot of it's about data. Some of it is about, the A.G. Lafley thing of spending time with the front line and with customers, yourself, to complement to complement the data.
Professor, the book stresses the importance of building a learning culture that continually track and respond to underserved or changing customer needs. What are some simple but powerful routines leaders can install to make this learning culture real rather than just a slogan?
Well, I think what I've just described actually will do quite a lot of that because, the mindset you want is one which is continually dissatisfied with the job you're currently doing. And Bezos at Amazon, has this slogan about, every day is day one. And so I think that you need to sort of, you need to make that happen through your own actions. And constant curiosity. This is actually something which should play to the strengths of marketers, because you can't really be a successful marketer if you don't have a pretty insatiable sense of curiosity. That you should always be curious about what could we do better, what is somebody else doing better, and so on. So I think that sort of obsession with improvement and those sort of underlying customer needs, as far as you can get it, and then also managing the internal culture of getting people, as they say, to ask for forgiveness, not permission, and that you don't punish people if they do something which was a reasonable thing to do but risky, and then it didn't work out. And people talk to each other. So you take some of those examples, make a hero of any person who does something like that, who goes beyond the usual, and celebrate it. So a lot of it is about those kinds of sort of internal management issues. Very much encourage those horizontal communications as well. Probably try to rotate people between functions a bit. It's really helpful if, in a lot of the great companies, the marketers start off actually in the field sales force. And that is a great way of learning about the front line. But similarly, I think if a marketer has spent some time in operations, make sure that everyone understands finance. I mean, ultimately, that's the score sheet. And the truth is, it's not that complicated. Again, most marketers have a tendency to think that that finance is more complicated than it really is. So I think that sort of mindset. There's always an issue with short-termism versus long-termism, that you want to have a financial discipline. On the other hand, if you push that too far as a leader, then particularly if you say to the marketers, we're only going to give you resources if you can demonstrate their effectiveness, then you will underinvest in brand communications. Okay, data analytics and a lot of digital marketing, which is to drive short-term sales, you should be able to quantify, how profitable those are, on the assumption that what you're doing in the short term isn't actually damaging for the long term. And so this is the sort of 21st century version of in the 20th century, the trade-off was between brand advertising and price promotions. And that's still true. Actually, working out the profitability of a price promotion isn't quite as straightforward as people think, because you get purchase acceleration and you get some sort of temporal effects which need sort of careful modeling, but also you need again a close relationship with the finance people and the operations people. What operations people like is very smooth flows through the business, and then they can predict and allocate resources, and they keep their inventories relatively low and all of that. If you do promotions which produce a huge sales effect in the very short term, then you may be bringing forward some sales you would have got anyway, but you're getting them at a lower price. And secondly, it's very disruptive to the operation. So you need to be careful about that. And you need to be honest about the fact that brand investment, the value of brand investment can never be reliably quantified. But what you can do is say, all right, say to the marketers, tell me what is the thinking behind this investment you want to make? What's the consumer research you've done which says that this is going to resonate with consumers and is going to leave memories in their long-term semantic memory in their brains, which is going to positively influence their purchases in 6 months, a year, 2 years. And, as a marketer, you should assume that the bosses and the finance people are not idiots and will listen to a reasoned argument, and do understand that if you only invest in what you can prove, you will end up running down the business in the long term. I think that's very difficult.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick Barwise, for sharing your time and insights with us today. Your
It's been a
clear
pleasure.
explanations and thoughtful reflections have added immense value to this conversation, and I am sure our audience will benefit greatly from your perspectives. It has been a privilege to learn from you, and we look forward to engaging your work further in the future. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.